Alright, so today we're going to do brakes on a 2006 Cadillac Escalade ESV. Should be pretty straightforward. Not anticipating any issues. What I had as a problem, actually, the brakes on this thing, the pads were pretty good, but the calipers were sticking. And then as you drive a vehicle with a caliper that's sticking, sometimes things can heat up to a point where your rotors will warp, and that's what was actually happening with this car, and I could feel a drag on it. So normally I wouldn't have had to replace the rotors and the pads, but because the caliper went bad and ruined the rotors, it's just best to do them all. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the jack put into position. And we're going to catch it right on that cross member right there. It's focusing in on my finger when I do that, but there's a cross member right there, right near the first wheel that we're going to do. And I'm going to put the jack into place and jack it up from that. Now the one thing that you'll want to notice is down on that rear wheel back over there, you see that 2x4? Most people will call that a chock, but I don't want the truck to roll backwards. So what I did was I put something in the rear wheel, behind the rear wheel, kicked it into place so the truck won't roll back on me when it's up in a compromised position. Alright, now as you can see, I got a really nice position on that cross member here, and I have the truck lifted up on this side, slightly off the ground. This is the first wheel I'm going to do. That other one is still on the ground. The front end is raised up a little bit. But again, for safety purposes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go put a jack stand, and I'm going to put the jack stand right underneath the frame. You can see the frame rail right there. I'm going to put a jack stand underneath there, and just in case the jack was to give out, I at least have a jack stand to protect myself or the vehicle from getting any extended damage. This is a 6-ton jack, and I have it mounted on the frame. You're going to want to mount it on the frame always. There's a slight slope in the frame. You'll want to make sure it's on a flat part of the frame. And sorry, I'm out of breath. I just got interrupted to go move some furniture for my neighbor, so I'm a little out of breath. But anyways, mount it on the frame, safety first. That way, if after we take the wheel off, the jack should fail, this side of the car isn't going to fall on me or anybody else. Safety, safety, safety. Wheel chock right there. So not going to do lug nuts. You're going to want to do these in this order here to take them off. This top one last, simply because it allows you to support the bottom of the wheel and take it off easily. So I have an air tool, so mine will go fairly quick, but you know, these are 22 millimeters, and you can either use a breaker bar or a tire iron or whatever tool you have available. Alright, the one thing that I'm going to tell you, and I used a breaker bar to break that loose. Long bar, good leverage. But these ones go like 0 to 200 miles an hour when they break loose. So we call those knuckle busters. So sorry for the shaking here. Try and hold that back. But when they break loose, they're going to break your knuckles. I got my glove here, so I'll be replacing that glove here shortly. But knuckle busters. So give yourself some room. Don't torque on it so hard that it's going to snap loose and the bar's going to hit you in the head or smack your hand on something. Just be careful when you're breaking it loose. Take it slow, steady pull movements instead of just big rushing and pulling hard, because when it breaks loose, it breaks loose really hard, and then they spin real easy. So alright, the one thing that you want to be mindful of, I got 2 screws out of here right now. I got the top screw, and then there's a bottom screw out of here right now. Now because I'm switching the calipers, I need to take that brake line off, and brake fluid is going to leak, and I want to minimize that. So I want to have my other caliper ready, and that's this right here. And what you'll want to make sure is that you got the right caliper, that the bleeder line is in the same place as it was as the one you're swapping out, You want to assess that everything that you're planning to do here is virtually the same. So I'm going to get this ready to swap this brake line over to this before I take this off. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because this bolt might be tough to loosen, and it's going to be easier for me to loosen this bolt with this mounted on here than it would be if I was to take this off and then try and hold it somewhere. I might need another person to help me, but I can actually switch this bolt and release this brake line and put it on this new caliper while it's sitting in place. And then what I would end up doing is just laying this up off to the side with the brake line on it while I work on the rest of this. So I got this switched over. It's a little wet right now, but I just finished switching this over to the new caliper. The old caliper is still sitting on there. It was a quick swap. You're going to want to do it as close as possible. I didn't lose a whole lot of brake fluid. These are going to need to be bled. We'll walk through what that looks like at the end of the project here. This is, you may want to put something down. This is going to continue to leak out of the old caliper until I get it off. It makes quite a mess, but you're going to want to put something down. Brake fluid is nasty stuff. Very, very corrosive. Will ruin your floor. It's worse than oil. So anyways, so now what I can do here is I just gently set that out of the way. You don't want to put too much pressure on this brake line, so don't let the caliper hang. Just be very careful with it. Just set it up out of the way, and now I can get the rest of this stuff pried and pulled apart here. So it'll be a little work to get these off, but everything should come apart. There we go. Got that off. So that's gonna leak, just like I should have said. But anyways, so now I'll clean up that mess and get the rest of this pulled off. And real quick, to get this bracket off, you got to pull this bracket off, and this bracket off is held on by these two bolts right here. So this bolt right here and this bolt right here. So we're gonna be loosening these and taking this bracket off. Pads just come out. These are garbage. Plenty of pad left on it, but the rotors are warped. So just replacing the entire setup just to make it fresh and new. Reset button. All right, so I'm just getting the last of this off here. So that bolt comes out. This bracket now comes off. This is the bracket. That is the other part of the caliper. Set this aside over here. These are the new pins. This is the old rotor. This just wiggles off. So this is the old rotor. That's the new one. I'm gonna set that down. You're gonna want to eyeball these things. Make sure they're about the same. Make sure that the store gave you what you were expecting to get. The one thing I'm always cautious about is getting my handprints all over where the brake pad is going to be making connection with the rotor, because you can use brake cleaner, get it all cleaned up, but it's just best to avoid that from the beginning. So I always try and be cautious, but this is literally going to slide back on there. I'm going to use both hands to do it because, like I said, I don't want to touch that too much. And we'll get that taken care of. One thing I'll point out is if you ever hear someone tell you that your wheel bearing is going out on your car, that's this right here. This is your wheel bearing. This is they call it a hub assembly, but there's essentially 3 bolts from behind that hold this on, and this axle nut comes off. I think this one is 35, depending on what CV shaft you get. It's either 35 or 36. Socket that fits on here, and this pulls right off these 3 bolts, and then you use like a pry bar or something, and you just start hammering. You can use a screwdriver. This will start to separate and come off. These you can get anywhere from Tamarack, I think, makes a really good one for around $100, but if you go to a parts store, you could spend upwards of $170 for these. But this is your wheel bearing. Don't let anyone charge you an arm and a leg to switch this out. If you're able to do what I'm doing right now, switching brakes, you can do this job. Alright, so I lifted that onto here with two hands. You know, this is gonna stay loose until you get your wheel on, but that's okay. It's gonna just mount up straight and be straight. It'll actually help when you get the brake pads on and the caliper on, but you know, this is normal to be loose on here. It's a floating system. The wheel is gonna pull it in tight, and it's going to be fine. That's going to be, you know, what helps stop the car. So you have this this caliper that has those pistons that squeeze on the pads when you step on the brake. But the pads actually ride on these clips. So I think it's tough doing this with two hands or one hand holding it, but anyways, the pads are gonna mount on these clips, and we'll get those pads mounted, and then we'll get the caliper, the other part of the caliper, put on. So we'll get the brake pads on, and again, this is now brand new brakes. It's brand new caliper, brand new rotors, brand new pads. Now next time you go to do brakes, you may only need to replace pads, but you're always going to want to bring this rotor in, so you're going to have to take all this off again. You're going to want to bring your rotor in and get them measured and turned, so you're putting a flat surface with a machined flat surface of your pad, and you don't have any warping, wobbling, or any seizing up. When you do that, that allows you the opportunity to re-grease those new pins. Those are the new pins that come with this. They have silicone grease on them. You're going to want to put silicone grease on them again when you go to change your brakes the next time. It just keeps everything functioning really well. But we'll be back at you here in a minute with Alright, before I mount these pads on here, the one thing I want to call out is if you've ever heard your brakes squeaking really bad, it's an indicator that your pads are getting low. And what happens here is your pads get worn down. This is the pad right here. Your pads get worn down to where this little piece of metal rubs on the rotor. And when that happens, you get that squeak. And that's designed to tell you that your brake pads are close to being totally shot and it's time to change your brakes. So your new pads will come with this. These are ceramic pads. You don't want to just set these anywhere on the ground, because you want this surface, this very flat surface, to not get any type of dirt or anything on them. So if you happen to drop it while you're trying to mount these on here, so I'm gonna be mounting these on here like this. They go into that groove. You don't want to get any debris between the pad and the rotor. You want to keep that setup very, very clean. All right, so this is like as easy as it gets. So sorry for shaking the camera here, but they just pop right into place here. That is mounted. So you see how they hook in at the top and the bottom, and now the top part of the caliper is going to mount right on here. And again, this is a floating system. So when the caliper releases, it allows the wheel to spin freely, and when you step on the brake, the caliper grabs these brake pads and slows your vehicle down. So it's just really important that this is all very clean and very maintained well, so you have nice braking action and not any problems, your car pulling to the left or pulling to the right. If you're going to replace one side, just replace the other. Don't do one side or the other. I always encourage you to do anything in pairs, and I mentioned earlier the hub assembly. When you replace one, just do them both. That way you know you have all your maintenance items taken care of, and you know, you're well in balance. This isn't overly expensive, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video here. But again, these are very simple to put in. Once you know what's nice about, see, now I'm gonna have to clean that out. What's nice about new products is everything tends to go together very nice and clean, and it's good stuff. All right, I got the caliper. It was laying up there, if you remember before. I turned it back. The brake line is not compromised in any way. It was quickly transplanted over to the new caliper, and I got the top pin in here And now I can go down and slide this into the bottom pin, and I'm going to get this all tightened up and show you what we're going to do next. Alright, that is it. I actually have these tightened up. This is the bracket that holds the caliper mount bracket on. This again, and I showed you earlier that this is a pin system. So as you can see, this floats. And there's pistons in there, and when you press the brakes, those pistons come out and have the caliper grab the brakes and slow the vehicle down. So it's all very clean. We are going to have to bleed the brakes. This is your bleed line. We'll do that at the end of the video. As I said, I do everything in pairs. So I did this side. This is all brand new. And I'm going to do the other side, all brand new. And that way I know my front brakes are all clean, well maintained, and ready to go. And then we're going to bleed the brake lines here. Just to give you an idea of time-wise, after I finished that other side, when I came over to do this side, start to finish was about 20 minutes. The one thing that I want to call out here is the pads are a little bit different. There's two of those sensor tabs on the one that goes on the outside, and there's one sensor tab that goes on the one on the inside. Remember that thing I said earlier that makes your brakes squeak? Those are, you want to make sure that you have those in proper placement. So the pad that has two of those sensors goes on the outside, and then the one that has one of those sensors goes on the inside or towards the engine. So this is all ready to go. What we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be bleeding the brakes. You can see in my master cylinder reservoir, I got a little bit of fluid loss. It's just below the max mark, and that's fine. We're going to leave the cap on, and we're going to have, this is kind of a buddy system here, but I have a hose hooked up to the bleeder, and I have this bottle, and I'm going to get the hose into this bottle back again. So this isn't anything spectacular, but what I'm going to do is someone is going to be inside the car while it's running, because you want power to the vehicle, and they're going to step on the brake, and I'm going to tell them to step on the brake when this is open. So what it does is it forces the air that was let into the line when we switch the caliper to be pushed out. So they're going to step on the brake with this loose, push air and fluid out. I'm going to tighten it, and then I'm going to tell them to let off the brake. And then I'm going to loosen it again, and then I'm going to tell them to step on the brake. And that's going to force any air out of the line and fluid into this bottle. And then I'm going to tighten it, and I'm going to tell them to let off the brake. And then I'm going to loosen it and tell them to step on the brake. And that is going to continue to force fluid and air out of the line. Now the sequence that you want to do that step in is the furthest from the master cylinder. So the master cylinder is over on the driver's side. You want to go the furthest, so this back wheel, the other side, here, and then close. Now, some people might say you got to bleed all of them when you let air into the lines. I know that the air in the line is restricted to just where I switched out these calipers, so I am perfectly fine with just bleeding the brakes from the front two. But because this one is the furthest one from the master cylinder, I'm going to start here first. I have a little hose hooked up to the bleeder. You don't want to lose the cap. My cap is right here. That's going to go back on after we bleed the brakes, but so we'll get the buddy system going. All right, now we're ready to loosen your valve. Car is running. I got someone in the vehicle. All right, press. So now I just tighten it. Release. Press. There we go. Release. Press. Release. One more time. Press. Alright, release. Alright, so it's all back together. Got the vehicle dropped. Now the one thing that you want to do if you're bleeding your brakes and you're spitting out a lot of that fluid, you're gonna wanna make sure that you watch the reservoir here. And if I shake it here, you can kind of see the fluid. So the minimum line is down here and the max is up here. So I'm 3/4 of the way. I ran out of fluid, so I'll have to pick up some more. But this is enough to keep pressure in here. But you don't want to step on the brakes with the cap off, because then it's just gonna come out all over the place. So when you bleed your brakes, you keep the cap on, but you're gonna want to watch the level. So you don't want to drop below minimum as you're bleeding your brakes. We didn't have to bleed all that much. Again, we just switched out the front calipers, so there wasn't a lot to do there. But now, brand new brakes, calipers, rotors, and pads on front. You know, when you buy a used vehicle, this isn't a bad thing to do on any new vehicle that you buy. So you never know how someone did a brake job on the car. You never know how long they last. This one, I hadn't done the brakes on it yet, and I was driving to work the other day, and the rotor started to wobble. And you know, generally when that happens, it's because there's a lot of heat that's getting generated because the calipers aren't working properly, and they were seized, and that was in fact what was happening on one side of this. So I could start to feel a drag actually in the vehicle, almost like the pads were not releasing fully. And didn't start out that way, but you know, about half hour into my drive, things heated up enough where they expanded, where it just kind of changed the overall drive of the vehicle. So again, the pads were in good shape, but just functionality wise, it wasn't. So I bought the calipers, pads, and rotors, and it was a package for this vehicle. It was Callahan on Amazon. They had 5-star reviews. It was I'll make sure that there's a link to that down below. But this is a 2006 Escalade. We got the Callahan package for $169 with tax. It ended up coming to like $180. So you know what, when you get those brake jobs done at a shop, they sometimes will charge you well upwards of $500-600 for a job like that. Again, I told you that other side took me 20 minutes. This one took me a little bit longer because I was videoing and wanting to make sure that I got you the information that you needed. But you can really do a whole brake job like this in like an hour, you know, hour and a half, and save yourself a ton of money, and it's not too bad. So that's it.